Okay, let's dive in. We're looking at something pretty ambitious today.
Yeah, it's this idea of connecting, well, almost everything, isn't it?
Exactly, like fundamental physics, how complex systems work.
And even really old philosophy.
Right. Trying to find that single thread that runs through it all. That's what we're trying to unpack in this deep dive.
And our main guide here is this article, The Geometric Word, by William L. Weaver.
Right. He takes Dr. Eric Weinstein's geometric unity theory, GU.
And connects it up with his own systems model and, yeah, these ancient ideas. It's quite a synthesis.
So our mission, really, is to get our heads around geometric unity conceptually.
Yeah, not the super heavy math, but the big picture ideas.
And then explore these connections Weaver makes, see if there's a real coherence there.
Exactly. Looking for how these different ways of thinking might actually be pointing to the same thing.
Okay, so let's start with the physics. Geometric unity, what's its goal?
Well, it's aiming high. It wants to be a theory of everything.
The big one. Unifying general relativity, gravity, large-scale stuff.
With a standard model, the particles and forces, the small-scale stuff. Finally bringing them together.
How does it even start?
It starts with something familiar, actually. Our four-dimensional spacetime, X4.
Okay, length, width, height, time.
Right. But here's the first sort of conceptual jump. Initially, this X4 doesn't have any fixed way to measure distances or angles.
That's a blank slate, geometrically speaking.
Kind of, yeah. Just the potential for geometry.
Right.
And instead of picking one geometry, one metric.
Like Einstein did with general relativity.
Exactly. GU says, let's consider all possible metrics, all possible geometries.
Simultaneously, at every single point.
Yes, all geometric possibilities considered at once.
Okay, that sounds complex. What does that create?
It creates a much, much richer mathematical space. The article calls it Y14.
14 dimensions.
14 dimensions, yeah.
Yeah.
Sometimes called the observer space. Think of it as this space of all geometric possibilities.
Right. Not our physical space, but a space of potential geometries.
Precisely. And here's a really interesting idea. The fundamental particles, electrons, quarks,
The building blocks of matter.
GU suggests they don't primarily live in our changing dynamic X4 spacetime.
Why are they?
They might exist fundamentally in this more stable, higher dimensional Y14 space.
Before a specific geometry for our universe is even chosen.
Kind of, yeah. Their existence is relative to this whole landscape of geometric potential in Y14.
Wow. Okay, so how do we get from this Y14 potential space to the universe we actually see?
There's a mathematical structure involved, built over Y14. It's called the chimeric bundle.
Chimeric, like a hybrid.
Exactly. It weaves together information about how the geometry can change, and also about directions within that geometry. It has its own internal structure, its own symmetries.
Yeah.
Spin 7-7, apparently.
Okay, so it's a complex information structure over the space of possibilities.
You got it. And then the crucial step is observation maps.
Maps.
Yeah, think of them as mathematical projections. They take the information stored in Y14
A blueprint.
and project it, or sort of slice it, down onto our familiar 4D spacetime, X4.
So X4, our reality, is like a shadow or a specific view of this much richer Y14 space.
That's the core idea. And here's the payoff. When you do this projection mathematically, the fundamental physics we know seems to just emerge. It falls out of the structure of Y14 and the projection.
Like what? Give me an example.
Okay, well, particle properties like electric charge or the color charge for quarks.
Things that define what a particle is, regardless of where it is. Internal symmetries.
Right. Those are supposed to come from the vertical part of that chimeric bundle, the part dealing with the geometry changes themselves.
And what about space-time stuff, like how things look when they move fast? Lorentz transformations.
That comes from the horizontal part of the bundle, the part related to directions and movement within the projected X4 spacetime.
So the theory isn't just describing these things, it's claiming to derive them from this Y14 structure.
That's the claim. And it gets more specific. You know how we have 3 generations of fundamental particles?
Yeah, like the electron has heavier cousins, the muon and the tau. We just observed that, right?
We do. But the article highlights that GU aims to derive why there are exactly 3, and their structure, from a specific mathematical setup on Y14.
So it wouldn't be just an experimental fact anymore, but a consequence of the geometry.
Potentially, yes. Yeah. And each generation, when projected, is said to naturally have the 16 internal degrees of freedom needed for the standard model fermions. It's a very specific number.
Okay, what about the forces? Electromagnetism, nuclear forces.
Also derived from the geometry of Y14. specifically from something called a connection on a bundle over Y14.
A connection, like how things are linked as you move around.
Sort of, yeah, it governs interactions.
Yeah.
And the equations for these forces, the Yang-Mills equations, are derived using a new tool called the Chiab operator, designed to pull that force dynamic out of the Y14 geometry.
And gravity, the big problem for unification.
Zhu claims to derive Einstein's equations, too, from a related but higher structure using something called the Zorro construction.
Zorro.
Maybe like a mathematical mask that isolates the gravity part during projection. The point is, it suggests all forces have a unified geometric origin in Y14.
That's ambitious. What about the Higgs field? The thing that gives particles mass. That always felt a bit tacked on in the standard model.
Right. Well, the source suggests that in GU, the Higgs isn't an add-on. It emerges naturally as just another component of the same geometric potential in Y14 that gives rise to the other forces.
Seriously, so it's part of the fundamental geometry.
That's the proposal. And even its weird Mexican hat potential, which is key to how it gives mass, is supposedly derived naturally from the standard dynamics within this unified framework.
Wow, okay. And particle masses themselves, the actual values, how they mix.
Things like Yukawa couplings and CKM matrices. The claim is they also fall out from applying standard principles within this geometric setup.
So just to recap the GU picture, everything fundamental, particles, forces, properties, gravity, Higgs, it's all proposed to be different views, different projections.
Of one single geometric reality living in this 14-dimensional Y14 space.
And our 4D universe, X4, is what we get when we observe or project from Y14.
Yeah, that's the essence of it. A universe born from pure geometry and information.
Okay, that's a huge idea from physics. Now let's pivot. How does William Weaver connect this to his standard systems model? That sounds like a totally different field.
It is on the surface.
Yeah.
His model comes from general systems theory, aiming for a framework to understand complexity across all disciplines.
How does it work? What are its basics?
It starts with what he calls the foundational trinity: energy E, material M, and information I.
EMI.
In his model, material is basically structured energy, EMC3.
Got it.
And information, crucially, emerges from the patterns and arrangements of energy and material. E plus M leads to I.
So information arises from physical stuff in this model?
Within our universe, yes. Then he builds a hierarchy.
Right.
Tier 1 is the foundational sciences, physics, chemistry, dealing directly with E, M, and I. Tier 2 is life sciences, biology, where E, M, and I combine and self-organize into complex living systems, metabolism, genetics, all that.
Makes sense. And tier 3?
That's social sciences and humanities.
Yeah.
Consciousness, language, culture, choice. And at the very top, philosophy.
Philosophy as the system reflecting on itself.
Exactly. The highest level of trying to understand the whole system.
So where's the resonance with geometric unity? They sound like different ways of organizing things.
They are, but Weaver sees a deep coherence, and it hinges on information.
How so?
In the systems model, information emerges within our 4D universe, X4, from E and M. It comes after matter and energy.
Right.
But GU's Y14 space, that realm of pure geometric potential.
Yeah.
You can interpret that as a space of pure unmanifest information, mathematical structure, pattern potential.
Ah, so information isn't just emerging in X4.
It might be ontologically prior to X4. Y14 could be seen as the foundational informational realm from which X4, with its E, M, and emergent I, is projected.
So GU gives a possible framework where information is the ultimate bedrock, more fundamental than energy and matter as we see them.
That's the connection Weaver's drawing. The E, M, and I we experience in X4 are the results of a projection from this primary informational space, Y14.
Okay, I see the link. And what about the hierarchy?
There's a kind of beautiful duality there, too. The systems model sees complexity emerging upwards in X4 from physics to life to mind.
Tier 1 to Tier 3.
Right. While GU describes the fundamental laws and particles emerging downwards as projections from Y14 to X4.
It's like two directions, reality projected down from Y14.
And then once it lands in X4 as E, M, and I, it starts building complexity back up through the tiers.
Culminating in philosophy in Tier 3, which tries to look back up, perhaps towards that Y14 source.
That's a nice way to put it, yeah. GU potentially provides the downward path from information Y14 to physics, X4, while the systems model describes the upward path of emergent complexity within X4.
Bridging the gap between fundamental physics and emergent complexity, both pointing to information as key.
Exactly. It suggests a deep connection.
This idea of a foundational informational realm, It feels familiar somehow. Does the article connect it to older ideas?
It does, quite powerfully. It draws a parallel to ancient wisdom, specifically the opening of the Gospel of John.
In the beginning was the Word.
The Logos. Through him all things were made.
Yeah.
Exactly. And the key is understanding Logos.
Not just spoken sound.
No. Philosophically, it means something like divine reason, underlying principle, cosmic order, the fundamental pattern or information that structures reality.
Okay, so the Logos is like pure information or structure.
That's the interpretation. And the parallel to GU's Y14 becomes pretty clear.
Y14 as a modern mathematical description of the Logos, a realm of pure informational potential, the geometric thoughts defining reality.
That's the resonance Weaver suggests. It's a transcendent realm of pattern prior to manifestation.
And creation, through him all things were made.
That maps conceptually onto the idea of projection. The speaking of the word is like the projection from the informational realm, Y14 Logos, down into the manifest observable universe, X4, with its energy, matter, and emergent structures.
It's pretty mind-bending to think a modern physics theory might provide a language for concepts like transcendence from a prior realm.
It shows how these deep questions about the nature of reality persist across different forms of inquiry, from ancient theology to modern theoretical physics.
Weaver makes another connection in his systems model, right? Something about love. That sounds like a leap.
It does initially, but he defines it in a specific philosophical way within the system's context.
Not romantic love, presumably.
No, not directly. He uses love as a kind of metric for integration, for coherent interaction, for how well parts of a system work together, sustain each other, and contribute to the whole.
Okay, so love as systemic coherence and integration. How does that connect to GU?
Well, think about GU's core claim. Everything in our universe, X4, is ultimately a projection from one single unified geometric object in Y14. Everything comes from the same source.
Right. So the deep interconnectedness we observe everywhere in X4, how things fit together, interact, form systems, isn't just accidental.
It's a reflection of that underlying unity in Y14.
That's the suggestion, that this philosophical love, this drive towards integration, coherence, connection within X4 systems, could be the experience or the manifestation in our universe of that fundamental geometric unity originating in Y14.
Like an echo of the source's oneness felt within the projection.
Precisely. Think about all the binding forces and connections.
Strong force in nuclei, gravity holding galaxies, ecosystems, social bonds.
Could they all be, at different levels, expressions of this fundamental drive towards integration that stems from the unified Y14 source?
That puts a different spin on things. It makes connection and integration seem almost cosmically fundamental.
It touches on existential themes, definitely. Our search for meaning, our drive to connect, to understand our place. Maybe that's not just psychology. Maybe it's reflecting a basic impulse of the cosmos itself, rooted in that unified geometric origin, finding meaning as aligning with that inherent interconnectedness.
It's a powerful thought.
The article even brings in pop culture, doesn't it? Star Wars.
Yeah, a lighter touch, but it fits. Yoda's line, "Luminous beings are we, not this crude matter."
How does that relate?
You could poetically interpret luminous beings, consciousness, the soul, our essential informational pattern through this GU system's lens.
As the projection from Y14.
Yeah, as the active projection of an informational pattern from that Y14-like realm of potential.
Into the crude matter, the EM configurations of our bodies in X4.
Exactly. And the idea of the soul returning somewhere after death.
Could be seen metaphorically as the X4 projection ceasing, and the pattern reverting to the unmanifest Y14 potential?
It's just a resonance, of course,
Yeah.
but it shows how these abstract ideas touch on common human intuitions about being more than just our physical bodies.
So wrapping this all together, geometric unity, as presented here, is really pushing a profound conceptual shift.
Absolutely. It's seeing reality as fundamentally woven from geometry and information with our universe as a projection.
And this perspective resonates surprisingly well with Weaver's systems model.
Especially the idea of information being primary and the hierarchy of emergence.
And even with ancient ideas about a transcendent source, the Logos.
Yeah, it feels like different languages, math, systems thinking, ancient wisdom might be circling around the same deep truths about interconnectedness and origins.
This human quest for unification seems to run deep, finding the common threads.
Whether it's a theory of everything in physics, universal principles and systems, or ultimate reality in philosophy.
Perhaps GU, the systems model, these ancient traditions, they're all pieces of the puzzle, different perspectives on the same incredibly complex, interconnected tapestry.
And the conversation between them, between math, observation, intuition, philosophy, that's where the really exciting insights might come from. It enriches our whole understanding.
Okay, so to leave you, our listener, with something to chew on, if this picture holds any water, if our reality, this X4 universe we experience, really is a projection from a higher geometric informational space like Y14, what does that actually imply?
Yeah, what about consciousness? Is it also a projection? Or is it somehow involved in the act of projection or observation itself?
And what about free will? If we're manifestations of an underlying geometric structure, does that leave room for genuine choice? Or is it all determined by the geometry?
Does seeing ourselves as projections from a single unified source change how you think about individuality, about connection?
Does it change the very act of science, of observing and trying to understand the world, if the observer and the observed are just different facets of the same underlying thing?
What does it feel like to try and conceptually step into that 14-dimensional observer space, the realm of pure potential?
Lots to ponder there about our place in the cosmos.